Today we're going to be talking about dumper versus dumpee psychology. More specifically, what we've learned over the past 10 years are the big differences between someone who gets dumped and someone who does the dumping. But first thing first, if you're new to our channel or our website or our ex recovery ecosystem, probably the number one thing you're wondering is, what kind of chance do I have of getting my ex back? Now, luckily for you, we've put together a special quiz on our website, www.exboyfriendrecovery.com, that helps to try to answer this question. Now, if you want to take this free quiz, all you have to do is simply look in this YouTube description below and find the link you see there. Once you find that link, simply click on it. It will take you directly to the quiz where we can get you taken care of. Okay, with that out of the way, let's begin and start talking about dumpers versus dumpees. So let's start with the basics. What is a dumper and what is a dumpee? In case you aren't familiar with this terminology, a dumper is someone who initiates a breakup. They're the ones who does the breaking up. A dumpee is someone who actually gets broken up with. They're the ones who are most likely to be reeling after a loss, and ironically, they're the ones who we get to deal with the most. So why has it taken so long for me to produce a video like this? Well, simply put, we have a lot of data on dumpees, people who've been broken up with, but we didn't have as much data as you think on dumpers. They're the ones often who aren't looking to get back together or move on from a breakup. Though you'll find out soon that may be a bit of a fallacy. After we felt like we got enough research or enough of a volume of understanding what dumpers go through, well, we're making the video now. Concept number one, both sides go through their own grieving process. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that if you're watching this video, you're most likely the dumpee. Now, there may be a few dumpers out there who could back me up on this, but a lot of dumpees don't believe that dumpers go through their own grieving process, but that's simply because of timing. So the best way to look at the situation is like this. When you get broken up with, you're the dumpee, right? The dumpee is going to go through a brutal grieving process immediately. They're often the ones who didn't want a breakup to occur, while the dumper is fine with it until enough time goes by and they start to recognize that they regret or miss certain aspects of the relationship. That's when they start to go through their own grieving process. So usually the dumpees grieve first and the dumpers grieve second, but it's important to understand that both sides go through their own grieving process. So don't go out there and think like, oh, my ex is not going to be thinking about me. It's more abnormal for an ex not to think about you after a breakup, even if they're the dumpers, than it is for them to actually think about you. That's the more normal human being type of reaction that they could have. Concept number two, dumpers are a lot more likely to go on the rebound. Now, I honestly cannot do this enough justice in this short video because I actually did a different video talking about attachment styles and how dumpers react to certain situations. So one of the things that we talked about in that attachment styles video was that people with a specific type of attachment styles who dump will oftentimes not try to handle their feelings. They'll sometimes simply move on to someone else to allow themselves to be distracted. We've noticed a lot of dumpers, people who initiate breakups, doing this exact thing. So a lot of men and women that we work with get extremely worried when their ex moves on to someone else, thinking, oh my goodness, they've replaced me. When what's more likely to happen is they're using that person to not handle the fallout of the breakup with you. So it is common for dumpers to be a lot more likely to go on the rebound after a breakup. Now, as far as percentages go, we don't have enough data to make an ultimate determination, but I would say as much as 25 to 35% of dumpers will go on the rebound within the first month. Now, an important distinction to make about rebound relationship is that it's a lot more likely that a dumper moving on within the first month of the breakup is going to be moving on in a rebound relationship than it is if they move on to someone else a year after the breakup. That's more likely to be a honest to goodness relationship. Concept number three, dumpers will sometimes use the dumpee for emotional support. All right, this actually kind of ties seamlessly into the first concept that I talk about with both sides going through their own grieving process. The dumpee goes through the grieving process first, and the dumper goes through the grieving process second. And sometimes that doesn't even apply at all. Sometimes they both go through it together at the same time. It's all situational. But what really is interesting is we've noticed a trend occurring where the dumper will begin to use the dumpee for emotional support. And we think this really has a lot to do with patterns. When you enter into a relationship with someone, assuming it's a long-term relationship, you kind of go through your pattern. You text each other every day. You talk to each other every single day. Maybe you have a date night 3 or 4 days a week or something like that. Maybe you live together. You're used to seeing that person all day, every day. And while they get on your nerves, the routine is settled. It's a pattern that you use to kind of trademark your way through life. But when you go through a breakup, part of the grieving process is having this sudden shift where the routine and the pattern is completely disrupted. And you want to get back to that. Sometimes we're noticing dumpers regret later down the line or start to miss certain aspects later down the line, and they start to rely on you for emotional support. Now, what happens if you give them emotional support? What happens if they reach out just to talk to you for like 3 hours at a time? Well, ultimately what happens is they'll begin to use you, they'll get what they need, and simply continue to move on. Remember, one thing that we really do teach in ex recovery is this concept of you and your ex are no longer a boyfriend or girlfriend, you're simply acquaintances. Concept number 4, you cannot change the dumper's mind. You can only influence it through regret and fear of missing out. This is gonna hurt to hear. But a lot of people sit there and think that you can do something to change your ex's mind, and I'm here to tell you that's not how it works. Once someone's mind is made up, usually the only person that can change the mind of that person is that person themselves. So what does this mean? Does this mean that everything you're teaching, Chris, is thrown out the window? I mean, what's the point of this? Well, it's to influence, or teaching you how to influence someone to change their mind. Ultimately, the only thing that you can do if you've been dumped or you're coming at this from the dumpy perspective and you want your ex back is to focus on the areas of your life and the situations that you can actually control. Now, what does that mean? Well, one of the things you can't control is if your ex dates someone new. One of the things you can't control is if your ex deletes Facebook photos of you on Facebook or Instagram photos of you on Instagram. Those are things that are out of your control. By focusing simply on the things that are in 100% of your control, you can actually start to project the type of behaviors that are going to influence an ex to begin to regret their decision to break up with you. Now, we talk a lot about this concept of being the ungettable, having this ungettable mindset. Well, really ungettable, if you distill it down into its simplest form, it's all about projecting a secure attachment style, being so confident with yourself that you have the fortitude to overcome whatever relationship issues are thrown at your feet. But it's important to understand that there's nothing you can say that will change your ex's mind. Now, don't take this to say like, oh my goodness, Chris is saying there's nothing I can do to change my ex's mind. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is if you come at this thinking that there's a magic bullet phrase that you can say to your ex, or you come at this thinking there's a magic bullet action you can do that will all of a sudden make the ex come back, it doesn't work that way. All you can do is focus on what you have control over and allow those actions to influence your ex to make their decision. Now, speaking of influence, that's a perfect transition to concept number 5. Concept number 5. It can be difficult to get the dumper to admit they made a mistake, but the sphere of influence helps a lot in that regard. Or this is maybe the newest finding that we've learned about dumpers and dumpees. A lot of times people are trying to understand, how do I influence my ex to come back to me? And sometimes the best way to influence them is through their sphere of influence. So what is the sphere of influence? I talk about this concept a lot on the YouTube channel, our website, and even our podcast. But what is it? Well, simply put, it's the people that your ex surrounds themselves with whose opinions matter to them. Friends, family, close coworkers, sometimes even heroes. All of these people's opinions shape their internal beliefs, or they need validation from these people to feel confident. Sometimes this works against your favor. Let's say that you were in a relationship with your ex and their mom hated you. Well, that's not going to really help you, especially if family is really big for your ex and he's hearing his mom or she's hearing her mom say, I don't like that person, you should break up with that person, and then the breakup occurs. But it can also work on the flip side, where if you are universally loved by this sphere of influence, if your ex dumped you, and all of the people surrounding your ex are sitting there and saying, why did you do that? That's super dumb. Why did you do that? She was awesome. Why did you do that? He was awesome. It actually helps a lot to change their mind. It's almost like they get the social pressure and realize, wow, all these people that I really respect like this person and think I made a mistake, maybe I need to revisit my thinking on this. Now, it doesn't always work out perfectly, but one thing we're learning about dumpers is that is one of the best ways to get through to them. Now, there's a lot of different ways to handle sphere of influence, and sometimes it's out of your control because maybe they just didn't like you or maybe they love you. Whatever the case is, it's important to focus on the things that you have control over. And the sphere of influence is not one of those things, it's just one of the interesting findings that we've learned about. Okay, one final thing before we end this video. If you haven't taken the quiz that I talked about at the beginning of the video, simply look in the description link below this YouTube video and click on the link you see there. That will take you directly to the quiz where you can take the quiz and finish it. Also, if you haven't liked, commented, or subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do so. That always helps more than you realize. I'll see you tomorrow.